Hi, Magnar. Thanks for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so first thing, would you mind to introducing yourself and tell us who you are, what you do?
For sure. My name is Magnar Sveen. I live in Norway with my family of three, and I work at the Norwegian Food Safety Authority with Christian, who we had on an earlier episode. I've been working with Clojure for a while. I've been getting paid to write Clojure for 12 years.
Right, right.
And pretty soon after that, I started using ClojureScript as well and Datomic.
Okay.
So I have quite a bit of experience doing that. And if someone recognizes my voice, that might be if they've seen Emacs Rocks, which is a video series I did a few years ago. And I also did this Parents of the Dead screencast, which is a Clojure, writing a game in Clojure and CrossScript, also with Christian. So,
Okay, okay. Great, thank you. So, 12 years of using Clojure. Later, you started using Clojure script, but you have been a full stack developer for a very long time, right?
yes. You might say that I've been a full stack developer since I started programming, because I've always, my drive to learn to program and my drive to continue programming is to creating things.
Yes.
And in order to do that, you have to sort of do all of it.
Yes.
So yeah, I was the single developer at my first job. There were 3 project managers and 1 developer. So so I did everything from the database to the front end.
To the front end, yes. I remember those times. I became web developer in 1998, and back then it was expected that you will do everything from setting up the server, sometimes even design, which if you see or if you remember how websites look like.
Yes.
Later we got designers, but still everything, even optimization for browsers. So before Clojure script came out, did you use anything like CoffeeScript or any of those dialects to get functional programming on front end?
That's an interesting question. I recently counted the years I've been using ClojureScript, which is roughly 11 years now. And I still have written more years of JavaScript in a professional setting than that. So
Yes.
yeah, I've written a lot of JavaScript, and I was for many years trying to write JavaScript in a functional style,
Yes.
and it sort of worked.
Hmm.
Uh, Christian and I ended up writing a library for sort of implementing the Clojure core library in JavaScript. But of course, without the immutable data structures, it's sort of an illusion. To have pure functions, you actually do need.
But when you look at practical JavaScript, things like underscore JS back then could actually help and make the code shorter, more readable.
Yes,
Great.
agreed.
Great. And you have been also Emacs user for a very long time, right?
Yes, I used Emacs in the university, and I was a very non-sophisticated user of Emacs at that time. I just opened the editor and wrote away. But then David Heinemeier Hansen came out with this amazing blog post in 15 minutes video,
Yes.
and showed off both Rails and TextMate.
Yes.
So I switched to TextMate and used that for many years. And then I went back to Emacs once I started working together with Christian.
Yeah. TextMate defined VS Code in a way because based on TextMate we got Sublime and Atom and then VS Code. So you can still see how it has evolved. So it was snippets what attracted you to TextMate, right?
That's right. It looked so magical.
Do you still use snippets in Emacs, or in Clojure they are not needed?
I would say that they're generally not needed in Clojure because it's such a terse language. But I do still use snippets for writing datomic schema attribute definitions.
Yes.
And some other small things like that, but generally no, not in the way I would do it in Rails, for instance.
Okay. And so you came to TextMate, then you moved back to Emacs. Have you started customizing it heavily, or do you use more or less vanilla Emacs with Cider?
Um, when I started making the Emacs Rocks series, I was using Christian's Emacs configuration, and in a way, I still am, because it was a good starting point for me, and we were both using it. And well, he was using it, and then I learned it. Is the right thing to say. But during that very intense year of doing Emacs, I started writing lots of packages for everything that I was missing from other editors. So I do have quite a few Emacs open source repositories, and some that are quite popular as well. Expand region, which is the IntelliJ expanding selection feature that I was missing from IntelliJ, and multiple cursors, which was a feature I was missing from TextMate. So both of those I implemented in Emacs. So I would say I have heavily programmed lots of Emacs Lisp.
Oh, a lot of Emacs Lisp. Great. Actually, I met two people who are using Emacs as a window manager. I think it's VM, but you can run applications as windows in Emacs. The only disadvantage is it's single-threaded. So when the freezes, it might freeze the whole window manager. But besides that, you are living inside. They call it Lisp machine.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. Do you try to get all of your workflow to Emacs so you can really open Emacs in the morning and spend the whole day in it?
I am happy to have my browser besides it. I also use sort of communication platforms like Slack or Teams next to it. So I don't have an urge to move everything into Emacs, but I generally don't have many programs open other than my browser and Emacs, and maybe something to play some music.
Okay. Have you ever tried to let's say migrate your work to other editors like VS Code with Calva?
No, I have I have tried to move features that I like from those into Emacs.
Okay.
And that's sort of the end of it for me. I think generally I choose solutions for myself where I am able to sort of fix things for myself. Generally, not only in my editor, but also other places. If there are, let's say there are 100,000 Emacs users, and you have 20 million VS Code users or more, then generally it would be, you would expect there to be a lot more development on VS Code, right?
Yes.
But I don't think that's necessarily the case, because most of those people are just happy with the editor as it is.
Yes.
And if something is bothering them with the editor, just find a way to work around it. But with Emacs, it's possible to sort of make it your own. And that's what I enjoy about it. So I haven't looked for anything else because I am very comfortable. And when I am not comfortable and when I need something new, I just make it. Emacs Lisp isn't the most wonderful Lisp in the world, but you can do quite a lot with it.
Yeah, but the next thing is in Emacs, the pyramid of, let's say, seniority will be, there will be very few junior developers, and most of them will be senior level, while VS Code being the most well-known editor in this year or for the past couple of years, the pyramid will be more like this. So there will be plenty of beginners who are doing their first apps, and let's say most people go to do web apps and not to build editors or extensions to editors. So this is different skill set, and
Yes.
it's to get through. How is it to build an extension for Emacs? Do you have to know? How do you test it? What if it breaks your Emacs?
Yes. I would just first like to just say that that pyramid that you described, that could also be said about Clojure, right?
Yes.
Yes. But building Emacs extensions is very much an interactive experience, much like working in the REPL with Clojure. You except that you're actually changing your editor as you're using your editor. I think it was Mickens who wrote an excellent article where he complained about breaking his tools with his tools. But yeah, you can break your Emacs. For instance, there's a command called self-insert command, which is the command that inserts the key that you pressed. And you can redefine that in Emacs Lisp if you want. It would certainly break your editor. But yeah, it's pretty much you basically run some commands and see what they do. And then you run a few more and see what they do, and then you tweak it until it works. And all of the commands are basically editor things. Move down in this paradise tree, and then insert some characters and raise this up, and yeah, all those things. It's pretty imperative.
Imperative, yes. This is my impression of Emacs Lisp, and also GIMP. GIMP as the graphic editor, there is a Lisp as well. And when I saw it, it was like, this is not functional programming at all.
That's right.
It's syntax, but that's it. And people variables and there is no immutability and so on.
Certainly not. It's the opposite of immutable. Everything is mutable. And that's sort of, since you're in the space of editing, I think that sort of makes sense in an odd way. But I did write dash.el, which is a Clojure core library implemented in Emacs. It's still mutable, but it at least has some functional tools. And I also wrote, to my big surprise, s.el, which is the string manipulation library. Because Emacs didn't have string manipulation, it only had buffers. And if you wanted to change a string in Emacs, you would generally have to create a temporary buffer, insert your string into it, and then start going to work with it in sort of the buffer tools. So s.el has things like uppercase and dash case and so on. Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. So some people believe you should build your own tools to let's say, or your own ecosystem. Are you one of those people who want to like build the tools you use to build applications you're supposed to build?
Experience tells us yes. That's generally what happens. I'm not sure if I'm just weird, or if it's I think maybe it's I just love building things, and much like there aren't very many career paths you can take that will allow you to build your own tools. I think it's generally coders and blacksmiths would build their own tools as well. Maybe some carpenters build parts of their own tools. So I think if you're a developer and you don't in some way build your own tools, it's sort of a lost opportunity. I don't blame you for it, but it's a pretty cool thing to be able to do.
Yes. I think it's always good to know what is happening a couple of layers underneath what you are actually doing. And if you build it yourself, you know it to the detail and you know exactly what's happening. Um, at least, like, I don't have to always build everything. For example, for databases, I'm very happy to use databases made by others. I actually tried to build my own database, but then I found that it's significantly more work for
Yes.
very little payoff. I implemented for one company memcache replacement in Golang. It was faster, but it didn't have that many features. So it's obvious that it was faster. But then, okay, you have to maintain it, and then it starts behaving, and then you have to replicate it, and it's a company with 100 million users. So like it gets all type of requests, and you have no chance to record all of them. So finding the case when it breaks, it makes no sense. So they ended up using memcache as well. Again, over those years, you are using Clojure. How did your workflow evolve?
Yes, I think I see. I came from a very, let's call it dogmatic, test-driven development sort of workflow. I was inspired by Uncle Bob and trying to do everything right. And I have grown in those years since to see that being dogmatic about things like that isn't helpful. But sort of that was where I came from. I was writing tests for everything, and we had sort of this test coverage tool. And yeah, I think part of what I liked, part of what I really enjoyed doing test-driven development was the fast feedback cycles. You write some code and you instantly see if it passes or fails, and you write some tests, and sort of I've kept parts of that. But I think the Clojure REPL sort of stepped in and gave me even more direct access to what was going on in a way. So the first thing I did when I started using Clojure, well, the very first thing I did was I opened my editor and I wrote an open paren, and I had no idea what to do next.
Yeah.
Because I was so used to for loops and the imperative coding that the idea about sort of just statements and the immutability of it all sort of threw me for a loop already before I wrote anything. But after that, I tried to sort of adopt the workflow that I had before. So I looked for Clojure test, and I ended up using Midge for a few years, and sort of replicating just the test-driven parts of it. But Rich Hickey had said that he didn't believe in guardrail programming, and that's sort of what's going on. Why isn't Rich Hickey on board with my Uncle Bob approved development techniques? And I never had sort of this eureka moment. It's just over the years I started realizing that maybe some of these tests aren't worth keeping. Maybe everything doesn't have to be tested. And in a few years ago, I wrote something called Clojure Runner, which runs Lambda Island's Clojure test framework right inside the editor, inside Emacs, which gave me really fast feedback also for the tests.
Yeah.
I just evaluate the code normally, and the tests are run for me, which is pretty cool. And also just working with the REPL instead. So I had sort of this journey from my code is over here, and my tests are over here where they are running, where the code is running here, and my code is sort of dead in my editor.
Yeah.
and move over to sort of the feeling that I'm inside my code and the code is alive and I can look at the data flowing through the code at any time. And so that was exhilarating and very empowering, I think.
That's super interesting journey, because like I know that the mainstream of Clojure development is REPL-oriented programming. I also come up from TDD world. When I don't do TDD, I always feel guilty. I haven't got this eureka moment yet. So now you work in the mode where you build the code with REPL, you immediate and you can write tests, and these tests are basically part of the code, or are they in a separate namespace, or how does it work?
I would say my start with sort of the dogmatic everything needs to be tested thing has turned sort of into I still write a lot of tests, but I try, or there's sort of, it's difficult because there's finding the right heuristics is difficult. For when do I write sort of this focused little unit tests for this function, which I still do a bit, especially if there's some interesting logic there, to maybe this can be tested sort of a regression test, just check if some basic things work with everything together.
Yeah.
And some things I generally test in the browser, like machinery. If there's, let's say, a WebSocket, and I want to test if it reconnects after, and you see sort of this almost impossible to get good tests for. But there's a different thing. There's a different aspect to that, because it's both almost impossible to write good tests for, and it's being used all the time. So if it breaks, you will notice, right? So the troubling part is sort of having no regression tests, nothing to stop you from pushing broken things into production for the things that are very rarely used. So
do you advise also tools like Clojure Spec or Mali?
Generally, only on the edges of the system.
The edges of the system.
Yes. So we do have some specs. For instance, we add specs to parameters that are being passed into our users or in endpoints, as well as we have specs for our configuration options. We don't want to break production because there's some mismatch between the configuration that's being sent in and what we expect.
Yeah.
But we don't use spec internally in the system because sort of, I'm not sure why we never started doing that. I'm saying we because Christian and I have been working so much together. It's not a royal we. But yeah, generally we try to guard ourselves against bad data on the edges of the system, and then we just assume everything is pre-verified inside.
Yes. For me, the best practice is I have always used MVC pattern on backend. On those gaps, like once the data enter your business logic or exit your business logic, when the data enter your view or come in a request, this was the this is the place when I was always using initially prismatic schema, and it caused so many bugs. But there is absolutely no intention to type everything. If it was, I wouldn't be using Clojure, right?
Yeah, right. That's a good point.
So you are working with Christian a lot. Do you do pair programming?
Yes, we pair program on the hard parts.
The hard part.
Yes, because, well, I think pair programming is a very good practice,
Yes.
And it has several good points. For instance, just the sharing of knowledge in the team, especially if you have more team members and you need to sort of it's a way to do code review early,
Yes.
which is always better than code review late. And I think it's a good way to get to know each other's styles. And since Christian and I have pair programmed together for basically 13 years now, we have a very shared sense of code quality and how to sort of approach different things. So I think that was very valuable, but also it's exceptionally exhausting.
Yes. Yes.
If I have had a whole day of pair programming, I can just go to bed after dinner, I think.
Yeah.
It's not something that I have the stamina to do lots and lots and lots of in the same day. But we sometimes do it when we are in a very tricky spot. But generally, we will pair program until we sort of feel like all the questions have been answered.
Yes.
And then split up from there.
Yeah. And it's good that you keep the same Emacs configurations.
Yes.
So you can work and you know how to use each other's Emacs. You're absolutely right about that type of fatigue people feel after a couple of hours. Honestly, I think, I was speaking with plenty of developers, how many hours per day do you really focus? And I always hear something between 3 to 5 hours per day. Yeah. And people are not robots. You can't get developers to focus for 8 hours on heavy or difficult problems every day. It's just not possible. But
I think it's also a bad idea, because I think most solutions to very hard problems will come in those moments where you're not intensely focusing on it. So I think a better way to actually solve those problems is to give it some time. Focus on it intensely and then take a break. Go for a walk, take a nap, something, because the solution will be much more apparent to you afterwards.
Yeah. I have a friend who is doing mob programming. So there are 4 people at one screen, and they work like this for years already. And it seems to me that this might create just enough intensity, because one person is writing, 2 people focus, and one person's... they made a recording on the YouTube, like a time lapse of their day. And some developer might leave, go to the bathroom or whatever. So even when they are 4, 3 developers are being focused and one might be resting. So you shorten that time. In the background, as you listen to others, you might be actually working, even when it doesn't look like so.
Yes, that's very interesting. Have you had your friend on the podcast?
No, not yet.
You should, and talk about this topic. I would certainly watch that. We have tried mob programming with our developers, but I don't think we did it right, because we were too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, he is a Clojure developer, but this team is actually working in, I think, Scala or Kotlin. Marianne Schubert. You can find the video on YouTube. Also, they are building mission critical device. I think it's for a surgeon. Wow. So it's a health device. We have been working on a couple of health technologies. We even are. So there are multiple levels, and it depends if it can harm the patient. And if it can harm the patient, you end up with the most regulated level, and then everything is more difficult, everything is more expensive, and they are working in this field. So having actually more people looking at the code base and having this continuous code review, is the best practice. And surprisingly, nobody have ever complained that they are not productive enough.
Yeah, I believe that, because I think that sounds a very good way to approach this problem, because yeah, it's just good. So
Yeah.
I would like to know more about that for sure.
Also, every developer knows the feeling of being stuck. Like if you are staring at the screen, you know there is the bug or typo or whatever, and you just can't find it. And in general, I would say in pair programming, this almost never happen. It's
Exactly.
extremely rare. How's your experience with pair programming when you are adding new person to the team? You are not just two now, right? You have more people now in your team.
Yeah,
So
we were just 2 developers for about a year, and now we are actually 6 developers. So it's
developer.
it's a lot. But we have gotten some very good Clojure developers, so it's that helps a lot with the onboarding.
Yes.
And they're so new that we haven't really just sat down with each and one of them and pair program together. We have given 2 of them one task, 2 of them another task, and they sort of get to know the code base and do some tasks to feel productive, and they certainly are. It was very freeing for me and Christian, who had lots of things that we had wanted to do but hadn't been able to find the time, and now we have suddenly very skilled and new Clojure developers helping us with that. But it's been I think it's been 2 weeks now, and I have been quite tired after every day of work. So yes. I don't have a good answer for your question yet, because we haven't sort of gotten there yet. We're still getting to know each other, and we've done lots of writing on the board and throwing out architecture diagrams and the domain model and the datomic schema and everything.
Yes. Actually, pair programming might be good at this. This is, for me, it was surprising. Like when I was reading articles about TDD and so on, everybody was speaking at around like TDD, where 2 people have similar level of experience, and almost never speaks about TDD where 1 person is an expert in that system and the other one is not, because everybody could see it as more like mentoring. But if the other developer is really good developer, especially really good Clojure developer, but just does not know the domain and tooling and processes and naming of things you have, it might be very interesting dynamic, and you can see how quickly different people will become productive.
Yes, and from what I can see after 2 weeks, very quickly. Impressively quickly, much more quickly than I had anticipated. And I'm really looking forward to pair programming more with them.
Do they also use Emacs?
You might say that everybody knew I was using Emacs, and everybody knew Christian was using the same Emacs. And sort of they all, not collectively, individually, thought to themselves it would be best if we were using the same Emacs, all of us.
Same Emacs.
So they have, several of them have been spending time learning Emacs as sort of coming to this team practice, which is very nice of them. It will certainly help us, everyone using the Emacs reboot that we did. It wasn't expected, but there's this sort of just very tiny things that happen when if there are 5 people using Emacs on a team and 1 person is using IntelliJ.
Yeah,
you get these commits where the requires have been subtly changed, or the indentation of maybe a when expression or something is suddenly changed. So, and it's not really a problem, but it sort of add some noise to the commit log and stuff like that.
Yeah,
It's very nice when you can avoid it, even if it is sort of petty.
yes, it's an interesting point because I can see this when you have multiple people. Like when you look at gitignore, the gitignore file, you can recognize all the editors of all people who have ever been on that project. They have been using, and
True.
and as it gets older, longer and longer, you get this like IntelliJ and VS Code files and Emacs files and so on. So, yeah, that's true. That's true. And what dev stack do you use to build the applications you are building?
Are you now talking about just building it? Because we're using Badigen and Depth
Yeah.
Eden.
Yeah. I mean, all the frameworks and libraries.
Yeah, I see. We have since I started in the Norwegian Food Safety Authority, we have built a few services. Couple of the first two that we built were built as statically served HTML web pages. So it's just a build step to print out lots of HTML. So that has sort of a very different architecture and frameworks than something like the sort of monolithic service that we're building now. And I think that's worth mentioning, in that the architecture should be reflective of what you're trying to do.
Yes.
Funny side note, the static web page is still built using Datomic because it's such a good graph database that putting all of the information into Datomic and then querying it back out again is simpler and more efficient than trying to just work with maps and lists and sort of manipulating the data structures to give the information you need, because we're building sort of highly cross-linked web pages.
Yes.
So for instance, we add a page for tags, all the different tags, and sort of building those dynamically would be fine. And building them statically, searching for tags sort of post-walking through all of the data or so on, is a lot less efficient and a lot less simple than pushing it into Datomic, and then you can look at the world as a database.
Yes. Yeah.
And a friend of mine wrote, Odin Standal, wrote a blog post about how you should put your data in a database in the front end as well. And that was after we had been using DataScript as our storage in the front end. So I think databases, especially really good ones like Datomic and DataScript, sort of can be used very successfully also where you generally don't think about databases.
If I can ask you, let's make imaginary situation. I came to you and Christian, and you would be supposed to build, for example, employee tracking system.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to keep track of all the people in the institution, one-to-ones, personal documents. These should be protected, have certain access levels, and so on. UI, that will be likely plenty of data grids and forms. What dev stack? What technologies would you use for application like this?
Let's start at the bottom. I had nearly said Datomic is not for absolutely everything, but I would certainly put something like this in Datomic.
Mm-hmm.
Because just the ability to see what's been going on with the system, which is very valuable. And never losing anyone's data.
Yeah.
And since it is me and Christian that are supposed to create it, we would certainly choose Clojure and ClojureScript.
Yeah.
And as for, I think we generally just use Composer and Ring to serve the web pages and the route. Generally, we have lately not been creating lots of routes. We have been trying to create sort of a query endpoint and a command endpoint, and maybe serving most pages via sort of just a page interface, sort of. Yeah, so we're not maintaining a very long list of endpoints with post and put and get and all of those things. Generally just posting to the query endpoint instead.
Yes.
As for the front end, I would expect there to be some client-side logic. I'm happy to just build stuff using HTML and CSS. Many things can be done like that, and more should, I think. But if we are writing a sort of rich experience in the browser, I would probably be using Christian's replicant to do the view rendering, and write most of the other code myself.
Okay. How do you handle migrations, like database migrations in DataMake?
There's a library called Conformity, which will keep track of which migrations have been run. And has so I generally keep all the migrations in a single Eden file, sort of with keywords as for each migration, and just pass it to Conformity, and it will perform all the migrations that haven't been run yet.
Okay. That's good. Now let's change the topic completely and let's speak about games.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's the reason I started programming, so that's a good place to be.
Good. And now you have 120 games, right?
I have lots more. I didn't correct you earlier prior to our talk. Yeah, I have 800 games.
800 games?
Yes, I have a room full of board games, and it's not enough. So I have board games in the basement and in the attic.
Wow,
as well.
It's a lot of games.
There are too many games.
Yes, in Oxford, I used to go to Thirsty Meeples with my kids, which is a place where you can borrow a game, play it, you can buy it. They have 3,000 games, and it's a business. You could potentially open a place where people can come and play games. Have you played all of your games or not yet?
In percentages, I have played almost all of them. I have played more than 90% of my games. But yeah, I think I have about 40 games. So yeah, that would turn out 95% of my games I have played.
Okay.
And I read the rules for all of them, all of 95% of the games myself.
No rules for all of them.
So yeah, I have read a lot of board game rules.
Yes, that's great. That's really great. I was making games myself, and it was one of the parts why I'm builder maker. And you notice also that for you, making games was one of the things that inspired you to be software developer. And you have 2 kids, or
I have one kid.
One kid. Do you play, Kyle?
Yes, we have been playing a lots of different games. But she is now a teenager and she's interested, but she doesn't find the time for it as much as before. But we do get to the last game we played was 7th Citadel, and she really liked that. And she used that she used the story from 7th Citadel as a basis for her D&D campaign at school.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I play D&D. Actually, my son today, he brought Exploding Kittens to school to play with other kids. I think it's a great way to connect and to spend time with your kids, but also it helps to build systematic thinking. And if you speak about D&D campaigns, it trains creativity. It definitely helps when you read fantasy books or science fiction books and adapt it to the D&D universe. So besides tabletop games, you created a game, a computer game, or let's say it's software as a service, right? It's hosted, it runs on a computer. Yeah,
You're talking about my text game, right?
Yes.
Because I have also created 3 board games, none of which are published, but one of them is called Y2K and is about software development. So I derailed you now because you were on your way over to my text adventure game. But I was just I just wanted to mention my Y2K game because it has every player works as a software house trying to get the same customers and writing code to or develop their software to get happy customers and earn lots of money. But the most fun part about the game from sort of a software development perspective is the crisis cards, because there are methodology cards where you can do like XP and Agile and stuff like that, but there's also crisis cards. And my favorite crisis card is PHP.
PHP?
Yes. And yeah. PHP says that the person playing the crisis card gets a boost in features. They get some more features built quickly. But for all of the players, senior and junior developers are the same. So all seniors are juniors for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
So it doesn't help having experience working with PHP. So,
yes.
Yeah, it's one of many jokes in the game.
Yeah, the author of PHP said that he does not consider himself a good developer, but obviously he is good enough to create a successful language. I would say the biggest crisis card for me would be if I deleted the production database, most likely.
Yes, that's true. But I would like to give a point to PHP because when I learned PHP, that's many years ago, I sort of, for many years, I had a laugh at the PHP function called MySQL real query, I think. MySQL real query. Because there was a MySQL query function, and it was prone to SQL injection attacks.
Yeah.
And it didn't work correctly. So instead of breaking backwards compatibility, they added the MySQL real query function. And for many years, that was something I laughed at. And many years later, I look back and I think, wow, they did that right. They thought about the users and they didn't break backwards compatibility. And it was a really great thing. You done them.
So when you look at PHP historically, there was like most languages try to be implemented in the language you are building. Like Clojure has some Java code base, but then you have a big part of Clojure is in Clojure. PHP is implemented in C++, I think in C. It's not using PHP to implement PHP. And those functions are very often just thin wrappers on top of C functions. So it's likely that there have been MySQL real query function in cedit, and they just wrapped it.
Yeah.
But later they added PDO, which is the database access library, which is object-oriented. So most PHP developers migrated to PDO. But yes, I remember MySQL real function. What I think, actually, there is one parallel between PHP and Clojure, and it's PHP arrays. I don't know if you have got a chance to work with PHP enough, but in other languages, like Python, you have dicts, you have tuples. In language, you have pairs, you have vectors, lists, and so on. You have like so many data structures. But in PHP, you have array, and it's all of that, basically.
Yeah.
And PHP developers were very happy to use arrays for everything. And when you look at Clojure code base, we are very happy to use lists, vectors, maps, and sets for everything,
That's true.
which makes plenty of things much easier because there is no habit of wrapping data structures into interfaces and then re-implementing the same functionalities over and over just because this is initerable and this is in, I don't know, lazy sequence and so on. You just have the same data structures and you are adding new functions that work over those four basic data structures. So people laughed at PHP arrays, but in the hindsight, I think this is one of the strong points or strong reasons why PHP might be useful and why PHP developers did like it.
Yeah, it's just data. It's
Just data.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. To segue into what you asked about earlier, I actually did write a lot of PHP because for many years my text adventure game Adventure Deluxe was written in PHP. I just to since you've asked about it, just say a few words. It's a very large Norwegian adventure game. Large in sort of volume, not in number of users. But yeah, I started writing on that in 1997. So it's 28 years that I've been working on it. And I started using the Amiga and wrote it on the Amiga until I ported it to Java on the PC and then PHP on the web. And finally to Clojure and Clojure Script in 2016. So that's 9 years ago now.
Okay, so it's the same game, but now it has been rewritten into four generation, let's say.
Yes, 4 generations of engines, you might say. It's the same content.
Yes, every time you rewrite it, does your engine get smaller because you understand the domain better?
I think the capabilities got larger instead.
Okay.
Yes, generally. It was exceedingly simple on the Amiga. It was to explain a bit more. It's a text adventure game wherein you are presented with some text and then some alternatives.
Yeah.
Each alternative goes to a new sort of file. Each has a number, and when you click it, it goes there, and then it shows you that text. And on the Amiga, it sort of started being just writing out stuff that happens on each alternative, and the only reuse available was that the 2 alternatives could end up going to the same file. So that was how sort of places were created, in that you could always go back to a city or a forest or something like that, because the alternatives sort of formed a circular graph, if you will.
Yes.
And then I added the ability to keep track of flags. I call them flags. It was basically just a list of keywords. You would think about it in Clojure, or a set of keywords. And being able to filter out alternatives based on those flags. So the player would start with a long sword, but if you lost that long sword, you would not get long sword related alternatives any longer.
Yes.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. It's interesting. So make your own adventure. How many screens or how many files does it have?
I had, let's see, it must have been maybe 15 years ago now, I wrote an online editor for the game in Ruby on Rails, which is not an editor directly for the game, but where people could help me write more stories. And I remember that the numbers they were using started on 50,000. And I thought that is enough. I will never write more than 50,000 pages in this page. And it was in this game. And it was this December of last year that I had to rewrite parts of my code to sort of skip past. They started colliding. So
Okay.
so that means that I and sort of the people who have helped me write on my computer have wrote 50,000 pages. And the people who used the sort of the authoring tool on the web has written maybe 30,000 pages more. So it's about 80,000 pages, which is a bit more than the entire Harry Potter series twice
Yes.
over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's exciting. So it's the whole universe, and when you have a hero, there are many things that might happen, right? And nobody has the same experience while playing the game.
That's right. Yeah. It's big enough now that it would be very unlikely for two people to have the exact same experience.
Exactly the same experience. And is there any, let's say, randomness, except maybe attack throws and defend throws?
There used to be no randomness at all, and there
Mhm.
still isn't in sort of most of the games. So all the combat is very deterministic. If you have, and it's all handwritten. It's sort of like an action movie that's handwritten instead of sort of a game system around it. Combat is implemented just the same as everything else. You get sort of the text and the alternatives, so you get some very dynamic combat experiences, and like sort of just throwing dice and seeing what happens. But the sort of the superpower that the main protagonist has is the ability to jump back in time.
Oh,
And it makes a lot of sense because it's a very you have the ability to go back and choose a different alternative than what you did before.
so if you
And
don't ever die.
so you have a sort of you have what I call time jumps,
Mhm.
which is a resource for you. How many times are you able to jump back in time before you run out of them? So we have had people die. There's a very difficult fight with the manticore, for instance. And then there's a lava lake where you sort of get trapped if you don't get out in time. And some people have pushed their luck too far and run out of time jumps
Yeah.
and lost their character to those things. But about the randomness, it's in that space, not in the sort of things happening in the world space. There's no randomness there, but in the space about how do you get more time jumps, and there's some randomness in that.
Yeah. Because when you buy a campaign for D&D, it's quite common that 1d6 trolls approach you. So you throw the dice, or if you are the DM, you can decide not to throw the dice because you know your party is just 2 players, or it might be 4 players. If it's 4, you will add trolls. But this is not happening in the game. When you create a story, or when you were creating the story, do you first outline the graph of all states, or do you first make the happy path of what is expected, and then you add additional side quests and exceptional situations?
I would say all of the above. I generally do not graph it out, but I have occasionally had to do that. But I would say I have sort of I think my main sort of approach is to color from left to right, which is a very bad way to draw a painting. But it's sort of like I follow the story along all the different paths at once. It's breadth first instead of depth first. Yeah. Because the reason why is because I have done depth first a couple of times, just written out the entire happy path. And that sort of cements in my mind what the player is supposed to do.
Yes.
So I take myself in that case to always either the player just fails or it's just moved back onto the happy path. And it becomes a very stale adventure that way. And I want there to be lots of hidden small things in all kinds of places. And having not created the happy path for myself, I am more sort of willing to experiment. Because the people who play the game usually play it many times over and try to look for, or they use their time jumps, trying to look for cool things happening elsewhere in the story.
Yes. Do your time jumps replenish after, let's say, 50 turns? You get one time jump.
Yeah, that's the randomness part. But yeah, if you do cool stuff, you get some time jumps. You might get some time jumps for finding new items and showing them off to a wizard. Yeah, just lots of stuff going on there. But you generally get enough time jumps to explore quite a bit without losing your character, unless you get too greedy.
Okay, and the game has one objective, like it can be finished.
No.
Oh,
no, it's the game. Well, for sort of new players, the game is basically just exploration and humor. I think most people who play the game just play for as long as they like, and once they're sort of done with that, it was still a lot more they could have done, because the game is so large.
Yes.
And then there are the other kind of person that sort of wants to conquer the game and learn everything about it, and they play it lots and lots of times and play it all the way through until nothing more happens. And that's the end. Nothing more happens. It's just like the heat death of the universe. You can walk around in the world, but there are no more orcs to kill and no more trolls to see, and yeah, all the zombies are dead. And that's sort of a boring end to a fun game. But I have tried to... The game has time, so it's a day-night cycle. It has a calendar, and I have made it so that the high scores, there are yearly high scores, will only count for a single year.
Yes.
So if you play and play and play lots and lots and lots, at some point the calendar will go to the next year and you will no longer get your place. Whatever you now do no longer affects the ranking lists. And that's the part that sort of the hardcore players care about. It's topping the ranking lists.
Yeah.
So in that way, it's you don't have to experience the heat death of the universe.
Have you tried ever using ChatGPT as a DM, let's say in D&D?
I have tried getting ChatGPT to play my game and see what it did.
What did
it played the game pretty well for a while until my instructions to play the game was sort of lost in its neural network, and then it started DMing me instead.
Okay.
So it turned the story that I had written onto me instead, and wanted to know what I would do.
Yeah.
So yeah, in that case, it was my DM for a little bit. I remember it took me into a swamp, and yeah.
Yeah. I am using ChatGPT to help me with being DM. I have a map. I use Dungeon Alchemist to draw a map. I have a story, but for example, when I'm supposed to explain the scene, I'm not a writer. I can't write about somebody who pulls out the sword and fights the dragon, and in the end, when the dragon is killed, he shouts at others, "We can go." The ChatGPT has been trained even on fantasy, and it is capable to do such a thing. So sometimes I use this to add atmosphere, and it helps in this. Can you imagine using ChatGPT to add more screens, add more stories to your game? So potentially you might have like 250,000 screens in your game.
Um, I would say no to that because it might be able to do it, but I'm not impressed with sort of the creativity across screens. If you know what I mean, it's sort
Yeah.
of a mishmash that ends up being a bit bland. And the text adventure game is very much not that, which is part of why it's so difficult for Google Translate to translate it. I have been playing the game in English on Google Chrome,
Yeah.
and it's not bad. It's gotten a lot better, but it sort of stumbles sometimes due to the quirky and the weird Norwegian use of language, which I think is part of the appeal for Norwegian readers, but not part of the appeal for translators. So I think maybe ChatGPT would sort of miss the language style, unless it is trained. Of course, Adventure has so much text that it might be able to just train on it.
Yes, yes. As long as you can fit all this into the context, it will be good. But yes, absolutely. Once the important things are no longer in the context, it will get misguided. How many people play the game?
I think maybe 8,000 people have played it since I started counting when I created the Datomic Clojure version.
Yeah.
It's not a huge game by any means, but it's also a Norwegian text adventure game, so that's it. But there are people playing every day. When I check to see if there are anyone online, there usually are 3-4 people playing.
Mm-hmm.
And we have it's free. It's gratis. In that I just put it on the web and people can play as much or little as they like without paying anything. But we do have sort of this organization that people can become a member of, which basically just means that they are willing to put in a few quid to sponsor the servers.
Yes.
So I haven't since I started that 2007 or something like that. I haven't had to pay for the servers myself.
Mm-hmm.
People have been sponsoring, and those I think we just have around 30 members or something like that, but just enough to pay for the Hetzner server.
Okay, that's good. So this leads to another question, and it is how people can support you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I am working in the Norwegian government, so I can't take like sponsorships or Patreon or anything like that. But I would say that if you want to support me, give me sort of a thumbs up when I post a new Parents of the Dead episode, or let me know if you've used multiple cursors, or if you enjoyed watching the show, or all of those things. I do get those occasionally, and it always brings a smile to my face. So.
That's great. That's great. Good idea. Thank you very much. And it was great time and great opportunity to speak with you. And let's repeat it again in the future.
That would be fun. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.